Hello. The presentation that you are about to watch is from the HEC HMS calibration workshop and was recorded on 8 April of 2025. This particular presentation focuses on the model cleanup of HEC HMS. This material is intended to help water managers perform real-time operations with HMS calibration. The main presenters that you will hear from in this presentation are Alex Davis, Matthew Fleming, and Paul Simon.
I hate presenting online because I don't get to see what you guys are thinking, and so please interrupt, ask questions, make it a lot more interesting under the circumstances, right? Okay, so I'm assuming everybody has opened up HMS. You find your software. We keep all of ours in a local software folder, and so you open up HMS, right? And so the example I have is the Russian River, and you come in here and you say, okay, all right, let's run this thing, and it's not running, right? That's the story of my life. The red letters of death get you, and so what are some of the things? Be thinking, and if you want, throw it in the chat. What are some of the things that breaks when you're trying to open up and run a standalone model? Like what are those things, those gotchas that you guys have seen? For me, the biggest thing usually is just some of those references, that you saved a base or somebody else has been in there playing with your model or whatever, and over time things have gotten messy, like my desk. and so for us, a lot of times we'll take and whenever we upgrade our SWMS models, we make a copy, and so it's in a different folder. So the folder name changes, that breaks the location sometimes of where things are. And so I made this really easy just so that we could spend more time talking and going through things than anything. But that's, you can filter by your invalid references. You can just look for grids, but it's usually pretty quick. And this is the messy version of this watershed that we're going to get into in a minute of why it's messy. But a lot of times, at least for me, a lot of times that's the issue, is there's a grid issue. A lot of our watersheds, we stripped out most of the grids. So when I think I got this presentation as punishment for sending Alex really messy watersheds that didn't run. So so here we are together. But anyway, so I think it's probably a good idea to make sure that at least one run in your model has everything it needs to operate. A lot of our watersheds, we've really stripped out everything except for just a few grids and all the time series to try to slim things down. But that might not be the best game, especially if you have to get some help from somebody, from HEC, or share a model with someone else. So those are all things to think about. So that was it, right? Now it's running. What do you guys? Okay, so what do you got? We got anything missing data? I'm looking through the chats. DSS types at gauges, single versus multiple DSS files. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Let's see. So
yeah, and I'm in Trevor's office.
Let's see. There we go. All right, thanks. This program here, Alex told me about, and I thought, oh, this is kind of neat. So yeah, I'll show you that one. This is my Osage watershed, and it's it's pretty messy. This program kind of helps you visualize what's going on. Get the other one here. Okay, so which one is which? I think this is the clean. This is the clean version of the Russian, right? On the left, on my left at least. And then this one is the not so clean. So there's a pretty significant difference. I want to say the clean version is only like 200 and something megs, and the not clean, the messy version, like most of my watersheds, is it's over a gig, right? So if you're copying your you're doing especially if you're doing a new forecast every day, that's a lot of overhead that you don't necessarily have to have and deal with all the time. So what are some things that some bulk that you could get out of your HMS model? Yeah, this isn't HMS. I'm sorry. This is what's it called? Windirstat. So it's just kind of like looking at it in Explorer, but a little different visualization to help see what's going on. So you can come in here and say, well, what are some of these big files? What am I looking at? And you can kind of take a look and see where things are. So a terrain file, right? So back in the day, everybody told me, Paul, you got to get your terrain files out of your watersheds because they're big and they're bulky, and usually your RAS guy and your FIA guy took a terrain that's based off LiDAR and stuck it in your model, right? And it's enormous. HMS doesn't need that level of detail, right? You could get away with probably a 30 meter, unless you're, or maybe even bigger if you have a larger watershed. Whereas, maybe if you have a small watershed with small subbasins, maybe you need something finer, but usually you can probably get away with a 10 to 30 meter terrain. So your terrain files, it's good, as we move forward and everybody georeferences their watersheds and starts using some of the cool new features, we'll probably want to have terrain in there, but we don't need it to be that RAS, based off of 2 meter grids, right? What are some other things looking? Yeah, okay. Well, Matt, you interrupt me. Just talk.
Yeah, it's hard to stay quiet. No, but you're right on there, Paul, about the terrain data. One thing that I like to do is you can have your detailed terrain data the first time you run through delineation, right? So if you wanted to use your 10 meter DEM to delineate your subbasins, fantastic. But then when you're done with that, you could switch it out with a 30 meter terrain or even 60 meter terrain just for visualization purposes, so that the footprint stays small, right? And as long as you name that TIFF, elevation.tiff, and swap it out behind the scenes, it's okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I've heard even the same thing with RAS. When you're just talking to CAVI in general, that you don't need that super detailed terrain file just for mapping.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. All right. So what else?
Let's talk about the grids, your time series and precipitation temperature grids. Paul, if you don't mind, you want to open up HMS. You have that project open. And let's look at that for a second.
Actually, can I just ask, like, what size should your grid files be? I couldn't see any kind of size on those files.
Oh, we'll get to that in just a second.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good question. All right. So in this project, there's two grids: gridded precipitation and interpolation. One suggestion I would make is the name corresponds to the product that you're going to use. You could do it that way. So MRMS if that's your typical look back grid project, then I would name that precipitation grid to MRMS. But what you kind of need here is, so we have gridded precipitation. That's the grid that Paul has selected there. And what you want to make sure of is in the bottom left in that component editor, this grid is referencing the rtma_grid.dss file. And that should be located in the project's data directory. Okay, and that's one of the take homes right now is make sure all of these grids and other time series DSS files are located local to the project. So it should be in that HMS data directory. And what you need to make sure of is for that rtma_grid, you don't really need DSS records or grid records for 10 events in there, right? I think our suggestion here is make sure that you have at least one event that can run in the watershed directory and only have grid records for that one event within that rtma_grid.dss file. Because I've seen some
Matt,
DSS files that are. Yeah. Yep.
I was just going to say that keeping it in that data folder with the CAVI and the linking potentially, like as you're working with the CAVI and HMS. At least I remember hearing that before, that it helps. Sometimes if you have it someplace else, you lose that link. Sometimes those links get messed up, or more likely to get messed up.
That's right. Yeah, you always want to keep at least one working DSS file or files within that data folder, so that what HMS does is it uses relative path names, and we'll take a look in just a minute why that matters. But yeah, you could go ahead and let's go back to your file explorer, Paul, and let's take a look at why that relative versus absolute path name matters.
Yeah. So do you want to go find it? You want to go see it in Explorer?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yep.
Okay. Will do. Okay.
All right, and go down to your .grid file. There it is, right in the middle. Oopsie. It's the fourth from the bottom.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And you can open these files with Notepad or TextPad. Don't edit the files unless HMS is closed. All right. And here you can see the file name for both of these grids. It's a relative file name, right? So the program's going to look into the data folder and then look for that rtma_grid. If you see an absolute path name, that's because you've located these DSS files outside of the project folder. And that's what you want to stay away from, because anytime you start moving projects around, if it can't find that absolute path name reference, then you're going to get those red messages when you open the project. Okay, so that's one thing to take note of. And the other, back to the precipitation grid, if you can find that rtma_grid.dss file.
Okay.
It should be in the data folder.
Which file was that again, Matt?
RTMA _ grid.
Gotcha.
There it is. Yeah, and so this is what we're talking about just a minute ago. You'll notice here, so this is January 2017. If you scroll to the bottom, let's see how the dates progress. Okay, we're still in January. Okay, so this isn't bad. This is just, I guess, data for the first half of January 2017, which is fantastic. I've seen some files that have data for multiple years in them. You don't need all that data. As long as you have grids just for one event, you're going to keep the project happy. You're going to reduce your error messages. If you do have lots of grids in there for other windows, what you can do is just select them, delete them, and then squeeze the DSS file, and that's going to remove it's going to fully remove all of those deleted files. And then Fatima's question, how do you know which of these are unnecessary? What I would suggest is pick one event, right? So for the example, 2017 might be the one event that we chose for Russian River to make sure that the model can still run in the watershed directory. So keep all of the time series, your gauge data and grid data for 2017, for January 2017, and then remove everything else, right? If there's a March 2019 event in there, you can remove all of those records and so on. Just keep the ones that you need for one event. Should we talk about why all of these DSS files are in the data folder?
Yeah. I know this one's got me before too. So
yeah, this is it's an old artifact of whenever you loaded your project to the CAVI a long time ago. HMS would take all of the individual records and push them out to their own separate DSS file. So these might have been all in one DSS file back in the day, and then during the import process, now there's one DSS file for each record. And some people find that messy. Some people can live with it. What Paul's showing on the left side is what I did is I took all of those individual DSS files and I found the records and then copied them into one DSS file just to remove the clutter. And so I took all of the paired data and pushed them into a paired data DSS file, all the gauge data into a time series DSS file, and then the grid data are in two separate DSS files. It's not a requirement, it's just visually to me, it's easier to see what's going on.
let's see what else. At least for me, it seems like the data, and we probably goofed up some of our watersheds by stripping out more data than we probably should have we didn't necessarily keep one event where you could have a one nice event to run. But I see where that makes sense. And then you also want to make sure you keep at least one version of each grid that you're going to use in your CAVI watershed in there someplace. Not necessarily just HMS. Oh, Roberta.
Yes, I can't type fast enough to put a question into the chat. So on the idea of one event or maybe one type of event for each HMS model you might have, or scenario or whatever, is there any kind of scripts that would go through the time series .dss file and like cut it back to just those particular events that you're going to leave around for testing? You might have years of data in there that you don't need. Anybody have such a tool?
Not that I know of. Yeah.
It's a good thought.
In DSS view, you can set the time window at the bottom, right? When you set the time window and then copy records into another DSS file, I believe it uses that defined time window.
Yeah, it really depends on how you copy it. Sometimes it'll take the whole thing and sometimes it won't. So gotta be careful there.
Yeah.
There was another question.
Yeah.
Oh, you were talking about using like RTMA grid and such like that. When you get into the CAVI, though, you might not be using RTMA. You might be using something else. So I kind of like the generic gridded precip data. Once you get into the CAVI with Cumulus and setting up a METView alternative, it could be any combination of different types of grid sets that you're putting together and not just RTMA. I mean, I can certainly see it for, as you're developing the models and you're testing different kinds of things, kind of a standalone development platform for HMS, and then copy that off and into a staging and start ripping out things that you don't need for the CAVI. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think all of ours are just named precip, but that's not necessarily the best example either.
Yeah. Well, I could see it that way, right? You could have one grid and one MET model. Or another alternative, it might get messy. You could have a grid that's MRMS plus whatever forecast product you use. So it could be, the name could be MRMS WPC. Another could be MRMS and HRRR. And then you would have a corresponding MET model for each of those, right? So it's really clear which product is being used in that MET model. And then somehow within the naming convention that you choose, it also is relayed into the forecast name here too within HMS. So it's like if you wanted to quickly create a forecast within the CAVI that's using specific products, the naming convention could help lead you along that path.
Yeah, what I usually find out is some of the data is missing and I have to switch over to like a stage 4 product or a different forecast product and that kind of thing. So that's why some of that decision is made on the fly there, but it's no perfect solution, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Alex or Matt.
Well, Jody had a question here about, yeah, we were talking about keeping data for at least one event in the base project or the watershed project. She's asking about, well, what if you have calibrated the model to a wet, dry, and average event? And I would say for sure, you can keep that data in there too. It's really preference to keep that. The nice thing about keeping at least one event is you're gonna not have those warning or error messages every time you open HMS if there's missing links or missing data. So if you do have those other calibration events, then I'd say for sure keep them in there. And I think this Russian River project, the clean version, does have data for multiple events in it. Let's see, Fatima had a question earlier too. Go for it. Sorry.
Go ahead. It's fine. Oh, no, I was just saying, yeah. I think the grids kind of take up the space. Your time series data doesn't usually take up as much space on your hard drive as your grids do. Especially if you've got hourly QPF or hourly preset and temperature, if you're, or if you're running snow melt, all those, those can really add up pretty quick.
Let's see, Fatima's question about single record versus multi-record DSS. Let's see, you'll notice on the window that Paul has now, it's multi-record DSS. And what's happening behind the scenes is, let's say you had this project, you created it, you imported it into the CAVI, and then you open the model linking editor. Once you do model linking, all of the data sources are automatically switched from single record to multi-record. Okay, within standalone HMS, you shouldn't have to touch the data source option. So even if it shows single record or multi-record, just leave that alone and rely on the CAVI to take care of the data linking part of it. What you want to make sure of, though, is the file name and the DSS path name that are referenced here in your watershed directory are pointing to a valid DSS file with a valid record. And once you do that, then you won't see any warning or error messages. You shouldn't. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. Fatima?
Usually when we get that error in HMS, if I change it to single record, it will run. So that's what we've been doing as a workaround. I don't know why randomly certain gauges don't like being multi-record. Do you know what causes that?
Well, one thing, yeah, we should say this early on too. Be careful about saving to base for HMS. Okay, if you're in the forecast directory and you do some real-time calibration and then hit save to base, I've noticed that some of the gauge and time series linkages get messed up. And then you're kind of in a vicious cycle of switching from multi-record to single and so on for future forecasts. So I think that's the trigger, I think. So I would say stay away from save to base. And within the watershed HMS project, let's just call that your base project. You shouldn't have to switch things from single to multi or multi to single. Just make sure that the file name and the path name that you see in that component editor are referencing valid data. Okay, and then also within the forecast tab the modeling tab of the CAVI, make sure that model linking is okay, correct, and then anytime you create a forecast in the future, everything should line up.
Yeah, I think I've seen that in the past too, where it fights you. It seems like in the standalone, the single record sometimes is more stable for some reason. But I'm sure I've saved a base and paid for it. Francisco's got a question in there about DSS files. Francisco, are you talking about the like the mod pulse curves, like pointing to a DSS file versus just having it tabular? Is that where you're getting at?
Yep. Yeah, because
Okay.
I noticed.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes on swims, when you and you guys have said this several times, when you save to base, some things breaks. That's one of the items that breaks when I try to download, for example, the little plat, and it doesn't recognize that there's a pair of data stored somewhere in the model. I'm just wondering if it was if that table was in the model instead of the DSS file, will that help or not?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think I see what you're referencing now, Francisco. Is go to one of the paired data curves.
Yeah.
And choose any one of them. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway. Okay.
All right. So here the data source is DSS. If you hit the drop down for the data source, the other option is manual entry. I think that's what you're referencing. Yeah, I think that's what you're referencing.
Yep.
Okay. I'm not a fan of manual entry because it saves it to the overall project DSS file. And I've seen lots of projects over the years, and I've seen project DSS files that have everything in the kitchen sink in there. And if I see a project DSS file that's really large, what I like to do is just delete it and wipe it away and start fresh. But if you're saving the actual data to the project DSS file, then you have to be careful. You have to open it up and remove certain records that you don't want in there anymore. So that's why I'm a fan of taking all of your external data and putting those in external DSS files and not the project DSS file.
And a quick
There's
note,
probably some other issue. Yeah, go ahead.
is the project DSS file in HMS. HMS actually indexes the entire file whenever you compute. So if you let that file bloom, it's just going to keep on making your compute longer and longer. So that is one of the files to be more mindful of.
See, we could talk about georeferencing the project real quick, and also just take a look at this. I like this example. You see the terrain data is loaded, and you notice, what I quickly notice here is the terrain data is more than what you need. So that's going to add a little bit to the footprint of this project. And what I would do, what I would recommend is clip out the terrain data that's not needed, because you'll save just a little bit of time. For smaller projects, it doesn't matter, but for Paul's project on the Osage, yes, it matters. There's maybe hundreds of megabytes that could be saved, and it really matters when you start copying the files or handing them over to other people. So do that for sure. This project's not georeferenced, and you can quickly see that by if Paul tries to click in one of those subbasins there, it doesn't highlight. You have to click on the icon.
Right.
It's super duper easy to georeference a project. More than likely, and I'll send out some notes after today that will point you to other tutorials that walk you step by step to georeference the project. But yeah,
I think
Paul's at the.
I think that.
Go for it.
Yeah, Simeon is going to be discussing that with the spatial stuff later.
Okay, I think we're jumping the gun then.
I don't have the terrain. Like, if you want to spend any more time on the terrain, but like the shape file for the subbasins and everything, we've got a session on that planned.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll hold it for that. Paul, if you don't mind, go to your File Explorer one more time.
Yeah.
And make that bigger. And let's take a look at some of the files. And I'll just quickly run through what I like to do is sort on the type column. Okay. And you can just get a quick rundown of the type of files that are in the project. You'll notice in the main project directory, there's a lot of DSS files, and I'm not a fan of a lot of DSS files in the main project directory. There should be only one DSS file for each simulation or forecast run and each MET model. So I usually, with a fine-tooth comb here, go through the DSS files and make sure that they're needed. And if they're not, then I'll evacuate them to the data folder or just remove them from the project. So that's one thing to look for. Another is, you see that .dsc file there, the Russian River Watershed SPN.dsc. That's an old DSS catalog file. There's no reason to keep these old catalog files in there anymore, so I just delete DSC files. That's an easy win right there. And then if you keep scrolling down, let's see. Any of the out files, you can periodically, what I like to do just to remove clutter, I remove any of the out files or log files, just delete them, because HMS recreates those every time you open the project or run a simulation. So I just like to flush those every once in a while. And you'll have to make sure HMS is closed before you flush it. And then keep going down a little bit more. All right, you see that funny file, the HMS 173150019 and so on? That's just an error file.
Yeah.
So something bad happened at some point. If you see those, just send those to Alex. Let him know that your HMS model crashed, and he needs those files to debug it.
I can't bug that file.
Okay.
That's obfuscated.
We'll send them to him anyway.
I've seen a lot of
Just
these.
kidding. Yeah. But yeah, you can delete those when HMS is closed, and no impact at all.
So Matt, we're looking at models here in standalone HMS. Are similar recommendations for HMS models within the CAVI? Because I've been kind of trying to follow along, looking at some of my files I've got for my base in a CAVI model.
Yeah, the same thing applies to the CAVI model, right? So if you're in the watershed directory, the HMS folder, everything we've been talking about, I would definitely apply it to what's in that watershed HMS folder.
Good, because what I'm looking at, I'm not seeing any of those files in my directory, so I feel like I'm in good shape there.
Yeah, you have a clean project.
This is just one of our watersheds. I know it's messy, but this isn't in the CAVI.
Yeah. I like Amanda's question there. So is our goal here to just to reduce runtime? So that's what we're working towards, Amanda, is reducing runtime. But sometimes to reduce runtime, you have to clean your house first. I guess that's what we're starting out with. And it's easier to reduce runtime when you have a project that's lean and mean, right? If it takes 30 seconds just to open the basin model because the terrain is super detailed, then that's going to take away from the time that you have to calibrate.
Yeah, every time you create a forecast, you're copying all those files over, right? So it's just going to take you all that take an extra minute or several minutes.
So I'm pretty new to HMS. What's the easiest way to determine the resolution, the grid resolution on your files? Right, because you gave us some target grid resolutions on some of those things for the terrain.
Yeah. Yep. The TIFF, the .tiff file. I think, yeah, the easiest way is to open it in Arc Pro and take a look. I'm trying to think if you can get to that information from HMS. I'm not sure HMS will report on the grid cell size.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think so.
I'm curious if you could just right click on it and do properties within the file explorer. I wouldn't doubt if it shows up there, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I don't know that it'll tell you anything like that.
If you go to properties, maybe, I don't know, maybe not.
Yeah.
Details.
Yeah.
There we go. Hang on.
Tells you the file size, but not necessarily. Well, you tell you how many pixels, but
yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I would look at it in Arc and see.
Okay.
Oh, Simeon, what you got?
Yeah, so I've had the experience before where I've deleted some data that I thought was unnecessary, but then HMS, next time you open it, HMS is like, hey, I remember this data set that you used to have here, and it throws you a flag, which I'm curious if there's just the best way to delete something. We have like a recommended way to clean up these files so that you don't get those error messages, or is it just best to deal with it after once you delete the files in File Explorer?
Yeah, let's see. If we're talking about the DSS files, what I like to do is with HMS closed, start moving those to the home DSS file. Like, let's just take the paired data, for example. So let's say we moved all those cross sections to one paired data DSS curve, and then delete all of those single record DSS files. Once you open HMS, it's going to complain, right? It's going to say, hey, where'd that data go? And you can use that tool that Paul showed at the very beginning, the file reference tool. And it's basically a big spreadsheet that shows you all of your data in the project. And you can just start remapping. You can use copy and paste too, or fill, to remap all of those broken links really quickly. So that's my favorite way to move data, is just move it with HMS closed, then delete the files, and then fix everything quickly within this guy here.
Yeah, Matt, sometimes we'll see where those, even though you fix it and you save it and you close it, sometimes those they come back. They come back to haunt you. Sometimes I don't know why it does that, but I'm sure it's something that I'm doing.
No, there's probably something. There's a gremlin hiding in there.
So the what size grids you want kind of can depend on what size your watershed is, right? If you had a really small watershed, you might not matter because your file size is pretty small.
Yeah, that's right. What I would suggest is trying to keep the footprint for the TIFFs to probably 200 megabytes or less, right? Just a simple rule of thumb. And again, if you've already done all the delineation, the subbasin delineation, then it's not necessary to keep the original detailed terrain within the project. You can always resample to 50, 60 meters if you need to, and then replace the files. The only thing that the terrain is used for after you have delineation is to pre-process the grid cells from Mod Clark. And what I mean by that is each grid cell within the Mod Clark grid, there's a travel distance, and HMS uses the flow direction grid basically, and the flow accumulation grids to map out the travel distance from each grid cell to the subbasin outlet. And that's really all that the terrain is used for after you delineate the subbasin. If you need to redelineate a subbasin, then of course you need that detailed terrain again. You could just go hunting for it and remap it if you need to. You can tell it's a big project when it takes a long time to draw the grid cells. There we go.
Yeah. I was sweating first thing. Yeah, shoot. I'm going to turn that back off. Yeah, I always try to have as few of those map layers on as I can stand, so that it doesn't bog you down when you're moving around calibrating.
Yep. All right. Yeah, Nolan has a good question here. What's the best way to remap the terrain? So I'm guessing, Nolan, your team followed the advice back in the day too, as you delineated and then you cut your terrains out of the HMS project, because the old way the HMS used to do this is for every basin model, it duplicated all the terrain related files. And for some projects, you're talking terabytes of data. And so we suggested back in the day to remove all the terrain. What I would do is, you notice here there's a terrain directory. And within that terrain directory, there's a TIFF file. So that's your main terrain. And then within that terrain directory, there's another subdirectory that has all of the pre-processed files in there. What I mean by pre-processed is that's your flow direction, flow accumulation, and so on. So what you can do is, If you've already migrated to 412, okay. And if it's working, then okay. If you haven't migrated to 412 yet, what I would do in your 410 HMS project is, all right, Paul, go to the File Explorer for me. And find the .terrain file. It's in the main, the main directory here. Or go back up, there's a .terrain text file. Yeah. There it is at the bottom. So with HMS closed, you could open this file up and make some edits to it. And let's just take a look at the file. All right, so it's looking for terrain data, and there's the name of it. That's a fun name. And by default, that TIFF should live within the terrain directory. So if you've already removed the TIFF file from the project, what you can do is find your better TIFF, maybe it's a 60-meter TIFF, name it to exactly what's shown here, and then place it in the terrain directory. And if you do that, whenever you open HMS, everything's going to be fine again. Should be no complaining. And then what you can do is within one of the basin models, run fill sinks and terrain preprocessing, and it'll create those intermediate GIS files for you too, so that if you want to switch from the old way of doing mod-clerk to structured discretization, all of that can be done for you. So that's the trick, is add a file to the terrain directory that exactly matches what you see in the .terrain file.
But you have to rerun those processes after you swap the new one back in. Yeah.
That's right. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I think like a lot of people, I had swapped everything out and had a text file in there telling them where to go find it on my hard drive, right?
Well, that was nice of you to at least give cookie crumbs.
All right. Yeah. We don't always read the text file though, even though it says like in the name like what's going on, but that's okay. But it is nice having that discretization and being able to view some of the, being able to view different things in the watershed or in HMS. That's really nice. What else?
Yeah, I see that one, Nolan. So if it doesn't have a .terrain file, that means one hasn't been added to the project. So that's the best case scenario, is you just open HMS and go to the components menu at the top, create a new terrain, and just point that terrain to a TIFF file on your computer. And then when you do that, HMS will copy the terrain into the terrain directory. Yep.
Is it better to just start clean for most of us, you think, if we don't have, like, if we followed all the guidance and stripped all our terrain stuff?
Ooh, you could. Let's see. You could delete the .terrain file, and the tricky thing is, though, it's terrain information is also saved in the .basin file, and so you'll have to be careful. Yeah, if you open that file up, Paul.
Which one? .basin?
.basin. Yeah, any of those .basin files there. There's. Yep. And it's going to be near the bottom of the page. So scroll down a good distance. All right, go up above all the zone information here. Keep going, keep going. There's a little block of text for GIS information. There we go. We're getting close. All right. So what you can do is, let me squint my eyes here and take a look. Oh, go up a little bit more, Paul.
Okay.
All right.
Subbasins.
Yep. So you can start doing a little surgery, go back down to basin layer properties, that block of text there. Yep. I believe terrain is going to be mentioned here too. So there's a base layer named terrain. So if you want to start scratch, you'd have to start doing some surgery and removing some of the references in this area too. Just make sure you create copies of the project before you start doing surgery to this file. And because you might have to iterate a few times. You might take out too much and then you correct the whole project.
Always good to zip a copy before you start working.
Sounds like if you have your old terrain data, it's probably best to use that.
Yeah, I think so. I think Craig's run into the issue too. That's why he has 3 exclamation marks. Always zip it.
Do it once, shame on you. Do it
Yeah.
twice. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Amen.
That's what I learned too. I blame our cat. So.
Yeah. Well, Alex, I think we've kind of hit the end of the first session.
We thank you very much for your attention through this presentation. If you have any additional questions, would like help, or are seeking additional training, please feel free to check out the links on the screen that are also linked below in the description. If you'd like to stay up to date in whenever more of these videos become available, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and you'll get notifications anytime more presentations or video walkthroughs are posted to this water management channel. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.